Galactic Emperor witnesses 11-year-old human slave save his ship, rewards her with Sci-Fi HFY. The vastness of the galaxy had been nothing but a silent abyss to Emperor Zorith until the day the small human child aboard his flagship did the impossible. Zorith, a being of immeasurable power, had conquered entire star systems, crushed rebellions, and bent species to his will. But there was one thing he never could have prepared for: what a single human child could accomplish in the face of a crisis. It had started like any other day. The Emperor sat in his throne room aboard the Sovereign, his enormous battlecruiser, gazing out through the vast expanse of space. He was preparing for his next conquest, his mind focused on the subjugation of the rebel alliance in the eastern sector. The battle strategy was flawless. The enemy fleet was no match for his technological superiority. Or so he thought. "Sir," his chief engineer called from across the room, "we've detected an anomaly in the warp drive. It's malfunctioning, and if we don't stabilize it soon, the entire ship will go into a hyper-unstable state and explode." Zorith's expression remained cold and distant. "I don't care for the trivialities of a single ship. Send a repair team." The engineer hesitated. "It's beyond the capabilities of our standard systems. We need a more specialized solution." The Emperor's patience was running thin. "Then find it." That's when she appeared, Lena, the 11-year-old human girl, once an insignificant slave, brought aboard after the Emperor's last raid on a human colony. She had been little more than an object to Zorith, an unthinking tool that would be useful only in menial tasks. Her tiny frame and her fragile human physiology were laughable compared to the advanced beings that usually roamed his warships. She had never spoken much, and Zorith had never cared to learn her name until now. Lena approached the engineer, her small hands clutching a worn-out datapad. Her face was serene, devoid of the terror that often consumed the lower classes when they were faced with situations like this. "I can fix it," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. The Emperor let out a low, rumbling chuckle. What could a child possibly know about interstellar mechanics? Send her back to her quarters. But to his surprise, the engineer hesitated. "Actually, sir, she might be right. We've tried everything, and she knows something that could work." Zorith's eyes narrowed. Humans had always been predictable, weak, frail creatures, but this one, for reasons unknown, intrigued him. He nodded for the engineer to proceed, a curious glint forming in his otherwise indifferent gaze. Lena led the crew down to the ship's central engine room, where a thick, pulsating energy core churned at the heart of the ship. As she worked, the crew watched her with a mix of disbelief and fascination. The human girl moved with precision, her small hands working the controls with an unexplainable confidence. There was no hesitation, no fear, just a quiet determination. "What is she doing?" Zorith asked, stepping forward as he watched her tap into the core's interface. She's rerouting the energy flow to stabilize the warp core," the chief engineer said, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. "I've never seen anything like it. She's bypassing 1,000 systems." Zorith's eyes widened, his attention now fully on the child. This was beyond anything his species could have done. The human had instincts, an intuition that defied logic and science. For the first time in his life, Zorith felt the faint stirrings of something unfamiliar: respect. The minutes dragged on, and just as the ship began to shake violently, Lena pressed the final command. The ship shuddered one last time, and then, silence. The hum of the engines returned to normal. The warp drive had been saved. Zorith stared at her in astonishment. The other crew members cheered, but he said nothing. Lena stood there, sweat on her brow, her hands still trembling slightly from the effort. She met his gaze, her face calm and collected, as though she had expected nothing less. "How did you know how to do that?" Zorith finally asked, his voice quieter than usual. Lena looked up at him with a faint smile. "I didn't. I just figured it out." The Emperor's mind raced. This child, this insignificant human, had saved his flagship from certain destruction. For a moment, the thought occurred to him that he had underestimated the species far too much. Humans, despite their frailty and their limited lifespan, possessed a resilience, a creativity that was unexpected. Zorith's voice, deep and commanding, broke the silence. "You have earned a reward, child." Lena looked up at him, puzzled. "A reward?" You will not be a slave any longer, he said. You will be given the freedom to roam this ship as you wish, and I will grant you resources for whatever you desire. Your intellect has proven you are far more than just a tool to me. The crew gasped in shock. The Emperor never released slaves, especially not humans. Lena's eyes softened, but she didn't seem particularly excited. She had never wanted riches or freedom. She had wanted to prove something, and now she had done it. Zoratha's gaze sharpened. I may not understand everything about your species, but you have shown me that there is far more to humans than I had ever believed. Perhaps one day, I will see just how much more you are capable of. Lena nodded, her small smile never faltering. I'm just trying to survive, Emperor, that's all. Zoratha's eyes glowed with a flicker of something, respect, maybe even admiration. He turned and walked away, his mind already moving toward his next conquest. But one thing was certain, the future of the galaxy had just been altered, not by another mighty conqueror, but by an 11-year-old human girl who had saved his ship. And for that, the Emperor would never forget her. Galactic Emperor witnesses 11-year-old human slave save his ship, rewards her with. Sci-Fi HFY, continued. Weeks passed since the incident, but Zorath couldn't shake the memory of the human child. His mind wandered back to the day she had defied every expectation, including his own, and saved the sovereign. The simplicity of her actions, a quiet determination and an innate understanding of complex systems, had rattled him. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was something about humans he had never bothered to understand, something powerful hidden beneath their seemingly fragile exteriors. Lena's life aboard the Sovereign changed overnight. Freed from her status as a slave, she was granted quarters in the officers' quarters section and given access to the ship's vast library of knowledge. Zorath kept his word, he provided her with resources, but they were not the type she had expected. It wasn't wealth or luxury that interested her. Instead, she immersed herself in the ship's data archives, studying technology, engineering, and even the ancient texts of far-flung civilizations. The crew watched her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Many were still baffled by her feat, but her presence soon became an enigma they could not ignore. She was not like the others. The Emperor, ever watchful, ensured she had everything she needed to advance her skills. But still, he did not fully understand her. Why hadn't she asked for more power? More influence? Why did she seem content with knowledge alone? One day, as Zorath walked the hallways of his flagship, a sudden, unsettling sense of urgency filled the air. His personal aides scrambled about, and the communication terminals blared warnings. Emperor, the Rebel Alliance is mobilizing faster than we expected, one of his commanders shouted. We've received intel, they are coming directly for us. Zoratha's eyes narrowed. He had calculated their movements, and his fleet was superior. But if they attacked now, before he could finalize his plans, there would be no time to prepare. The timing was disastrous. In the war room, the tension was palpable. The generals and fleet commanders shuffled over holographic maps, calculating trajectories and fleet formations. Zorath stood at the center, contemplating their options, but something gnawed at him. Something was missing. That was when Lena appeared. Her appearance was no longer that of a nervous, young slave. She had changed. Her face had become more confident, more assured, like someone who had learned to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. She approached the command center, ignoring the surprised glances from the officers. What is it, child? Zoratha's voice was sharp, but there was a strange curiosity in his tone. I think you're underestimating them, she said simply. A few of the officers snickered, but Zoratha's gaze sharpened. His curiosity piqued once again. And why would that be? Lena stepped forward, looking at the star maps laid out in front of them. The rebel fleet doesn't just have numbers on their side. They've got something else, something you might not have accounted for. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but Zorath remained silent, letting her speak. They have access to ancient technology, not the kind you've seen or studied. It's something older, something that's been buried in the ruins of the old empires, something that could turn the tide of any battle in seconds. Lena paused, watching the faces of the generals and commanders, who had all suddenly become less certain of their superiority. Zoratha's mind raced. The mention of ancient technology sparked a dangerous realization. The rebellion wasn't just a group of insurgents. They were tapping into something far beyond what he'd prepared for. This was exactly the kind of weaponry that had once crushed his ancestors. "What do you propose?" Zorith asked, his voice tinged with the slightest trace of respect. Lena's face was focused, serious. "You need to use their weakness against them. If they rely on this technology, they'll be vulnerable in ways they haven't even realized. I can get into their systems, bypass their defenses, and turn their own weapons against them. But I'll need access to a secure terminal." The room fell silent. Zorith stared at the girl, his mind spinning. Here she was again, this child who had once been a slave and now, in her own unassuming way, was becoming a vital asset to his war machine. "We'll give you the access," Zorith said, his voice calm and composed, masking the unsettling sense that he had just placed a great deal of trust in a human child. "But make no mistake, if you fail, your freedom is forfeit." Lena nodded, unflinching, a calm resolve emanating from her. "I'll succeed." Over the next few days, the crew worked frantically to prepare for the upcoming battle. Zorith watched Lena from afar as she interfaced with the ship's most secure systems, her fingers flying across the terminal with unnatural speed. She had become something more than a mere child in his eyes. She was a force to be reckoned with. When the rebel fleet finally arrived at the edge of the Sovereign's sensor range, Zoritha's fleet stood ready. His fleet was vast and powerful, but it was the unexpected presence of Lena that made all the difference. As the battle unfolded, the rebels deployed their secret weapon, a mysterious energy shield that seemed impervious to conventional weaponry. But Lena had already anticipated this. From her terminal, she sent a command to her own fleet's weapons systems, triggering a cascade of unexpected effects. She had turned the rebel fleet's own weaponry against them. The ancient technology they had relied on malfunctioned, turning their shields into an open breach. Zoritha's fleet, now free to fire without restriction, obliterated the enemy's front lines. The battle was over in a matter of hours. The rebel forces had been routed, and the Sovereign stood unscathed. Zorith stood on the bridge, staring out at the wreckage of the battlefield. His fleet had emerged victorious, but his mind wasn't focused on the destruction. He turned to Lena, who had quietly returned to her station, as if this victory was no more than an ordinary task for her. "You saved us again," he said quietly, his voice reflecting something deeper than mere command. "What more are you capable of?" Lena didn't look up at him. "Just enough to survive," she replied, her tone soft. Zorith smiled to himself, a rare thing for someone so often consumed by power. "Perhaps humans aren't the weak creatures I once believed. Perhaps they are far more capable than any of us." As the Sovereign sailed through the stars, victorious once more, the Emperor knew one thing for certain: the future of the galaxy would not be shaped by the greatest armies or the most advanced technologies. It would be shaped by the unexpected brilliance of those who were thought to be the most powerless. And at the center of it all stood a young human girl who had proven, time and time again, that even in a universe of infinite power and complexity, the most unexpected forces could still change the course of history. Galactic Emperor witnesses 11-year-old human slave save his ship, rewards her with. Sci-Fi HFY continued. After the victory over the Rebel Alliance, the Sovereign was in high spirits. Zoritha's fleet was unstoppable, and the Emperor had solidified his power over a vast stretch of the galaxy. Yet, despite the triumphs, Zoritha's thoughts frequently returned to Lena. She was no longer just a curiosity or an asset. In his mind, she had become something more, an enigma, a symbol of what humans could be. Her intelligence, her instincts, her ability to see patterns that others missed. He was forced to confront the fact that she had become indispensable. In the months following the victory, Zorith gave Lena a new title, advisor. While many in his inner circle grumbled at the idea of a mere child holding such a position, the Emperor's word was law, and they dared not challenge it. As advisor, Lena had access to the highest-level strategic meetings and decision-making processes. She was even consulted during the preparation for the next wave of conquests. But Lena's focus wasn't on conquest, it never had been. She spent her days in the ship's archives, exploring long-forgotten scientific papers and ancient texts. Her natural curiosity led her to ask questions no one had thought to ask in millennia. There was a new energy in her work, an urgency, a drive to understand the greater mysteries of the universe. One evening, As Zorith sat in his private chambers overlooking the stars, he felt a disturbance in the air, a sudden shift in the energy of the ship. It was an unusual sensation, one that he recognized only in rare moments of profound change. He turned to see Lena standing at the entrance, her expression thoughtful. The hum of the ship's engines seemed to soften as she walked toward him, her presence commanding attention, even in silence. "What is it, Lena?" Zorith asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. It was a tone that even he hadn't realized he'd adopted when speaking to her. "I've found something," she said, her voice quiet but filled with a sense of revelation, "something the Empire has overlooked." Zorith arched an eyebrow. "Go on." Lena placed a data pad on the table in front of him. "This," she said, "is a blueprint for something that's been lost to time, an ancient weapon, more powerful than anything you've ever encountered. It's not just a weapon of destruction, it's a weapon of transformation." Zorith studied the schematics on the pad. At first glance, it appeared like any other advanced weapon system: cannons, energy shields, propulsion systems, but there was something about the design that felt wrong. It was too complex, too alien, even for the most advanced minds in the galaxy. The architecture defied logic. "What is this?" Zorith's voice was barely a whisper, more to himself than to Lena. He scrolled through the design. "This technology. It doesn't belong to any species we know. It's older than the Empire itself." Lena nodded, her eyes focused on the schematics. "It's not just a weapon, though. It's a device capable of reshaping entire star systems, altering the very fabric of space and time. With this, you could reshape the galaxy as you see fit. No rebellion could stand against you. No empire could rival yours." Zorith leaned back in his chair, staring at the blueprint. This kind of power, it was beyond even his wildest dreams. With it, he could destroy entire planets in an instant or bend the very stars to his will. But there was something unsettling about it. He could sense the potential for destruction, but also for something else, something he hadn't considered before: control over the very flow of life itself. "And what do you want in return?" Zorith asked, already knowing the answer, but curious to hear her response. Lena looked at him, her face betraying no emotion. "I don't want anything, Emperor. I've given you everything I know. I'm not asking for power. I just want to understand it, to know why this was created." Zorith sat in silence for a moment. It had always been about power for him, control over the galaxy, over species, over everything that opposed him. But Lena, despite her brilliance, was asking for something else entirely. She wanted knowledge, understanding, perhaps, in a strange way. It was a request for something he himself had never truly understood: the limits of power. "Why don't you build it?" Zorith finally asked. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Why not take control of it for yourself?" Lena paused, her gaze fixed on the blueprint. "Because I know what happens when power is unchecked. You'll destroy everything, Emperor. I don't want to be part of that." Zorith stared at her, his mind racing. The child who had once been a slave now spoke to him like an equal, like a peer. It was a humbling thought. It forced him to confront something he had never considered: what would happen when absolute power met the limitations of wisdom. "I'll help you build it," Lena continued, her voice steady. "But we have to be careful. There's a balance to be struck. The galaxy doesn't need another conqueror. It needs a protector. And that's something you could be, if you choose." Zorith felt a strange stir in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before: doubt. It was fleeting, but it was there. For the first time, he questioned whether he was the one who should wield this power, or whether someone else might be better suited for the task. "I don't need your protection, Lena," Zorith replied, though his words lacked the usual certainty. "But I'll hear you out." And so, together, they began to build the device, this ancient weapon, this force that could alter the very nature of the galaxy. Lena worked tirelessly, her understanding of ancient technology growing with every passing day. Zorith watched as the ship's engineers and scientists struggled to keep up with her insights. Her mind was limitless, her vision unclouded by the desire for power. As they neared the completion of the device, Zorith found himself at a crossroads. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The power to control the galaxy was within his grasp. But the cost, what would be the cost? Lena stood before him one last time, her gaze unwavering. I don't think you need to use this weapon, she said quietly, but I'm not going to stop you from making your own choice. Just remember, once you have this kind of power, you can never go back. Zorith stared at her, his eyes hardening. Perhaps, he said, but perhaps some of us are meant to change the future. Lena didn't answer. She simply nodded, her face resigned. Zorith took a deep breath, the final decision hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The device was ready. But as the power surged through the chambers of the Sovereign, Zorith had to ask himself, would this be his moment of greatest triumph, or the beginning of his greatest failure? The future of the galaxy, and his empire, rested in his hands. Galactic Emperor witnesses 11-year-old human slave save his ship, rewards her with. Sci-Fi HFY, continued. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Zorith anticipated. The device was complete. The hum of its power coursed through the depths of the Sovereign, a quiet promise of unimaginable potential. Its presence in the heart of the ship felt almost unnatural, as though the very fabric of reality bent to its will. It was, in essence, a cosmic lever, ready to shift the balance of the galaxy. But Zorith hesitated, his fingers hovering above the final activation switch. Lena stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the device with quiet contemplation. She had worked alongside him, not as an underling or a subordinate, but as a partner. Her presence was a reminder of something Zorith had never truly understood, the true value of restraint. Power, after all, was not a path to absolute domination, it was a tool, and how it was wielded mattered more than the magnitude of its force. Are you ready to proceed, Emperor? Lena asked, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of 1,000 untold possibilities. Zorith turned his gaze to her, his brow furrowing. Despite all the victories, all the conquests, and all the fear he commanded across the galaxy, there was something unnerving in the way she asked. She wasn't just addressing him as a ruler, she was challenging him to confront himself. I should ask you the same question, he replied, his voice colder than it had been in weeks. You understand the weight of what we're about to do? Lena nodded. I do. I also understand that once this is activated, there's no turning back. This weapon is capable of reshaping the entire galaxy, not just its people or its systems, but the very fabric of space itself. You could destroy everything, or you could remake it in your own image. But that's the key, isn't it? You'll be remaking the galaxy, and not just in any way, but in your image. Who do you want to be in that future? Zoritha's heart skipped a beat, the gravity of her words sinking in. He had always believed that his destiny was one of ultimate control, that the galaxy was his to shape however he saw fit. Yet in that moment, the weight of the choice before him seemed far heavier than it ever had before. The galaxy was vast, its complexity beyond even his comprehension. To wield the power of creation and destruction, to be the master of all life, was that the destiny of a true emperor, or the folly of someone too blinded by ambition? He looked at Lena, the child who had once been a slave, who had defied every expectation and proven herself capable of so much more. She wasn't simply a tool for his ambitions anymore. She had become a voice of reason, a reminder that wisdom and restraint were just as important as strength. Do you think I should activate it? Zorith asked, the first time in his life that he had ever questioned the direction of his own plans. Lena met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I think you should ask yourself what kind of ruler you want to be. Power can destroy, Emperor, but it can also build something new, something better. Zorith turned back to the device, his thoughts swirling in a tumult of contradictions. For the first time, he realized that true power wasn't in commanding armies or conquering planets. It was in the ability to choose, the ability to see beyond the immediate destruction and into the consequences of that destruction. If he activated the device, it would change everything, but it could also cost him everything. Lena stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. If you use this, you will shape the future of the galaxy. But remember, once it's done, it's no longer just yours. It belongs to everyone. Can you live with that? Zoritha's mind raced. He had never considered that possibility. He had always thought of power as something to be hoarded, something to control. But now, as the weight of her words settled in, he saw the true cost of wielding such power. Suddenly, a loud alarm rang through the Sovereign, shattering the heavy silence in the room. Emperor, one of his generals shouted through the calms, an unexpected fleet has entered our sector. It's the Rebel Alliance, again. Zoratha's eyes flashed with irritation. He had thought the rebels were gone, crushed beyond hope. But now, they were back, and they had brought more ships than before. The very thing he had feared, the galaxy, slipping back into chaos. "We don't have time to deliberate," Zorath said, his tone turning cold again as he stood tall. "Activate the device. Now." Lena, however, stepped forward with a firm hand. "No, Emperor, this is not the time." Zorath froze, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, not the time? We have no choice." "Maybe you do," she said softly, "but this is not the solution to every problem. If you fight this way, you are no better than the rebels themselves. You'll be using destruction as your only answer. Is that what you want to become?" Zorath felt the room closing in on him. The device loomed behind him, an instrument of immeasurable power. Yet her words kept him rooted in place. Could he face the rebels? The same ones who had so brazenly challenged him, without falling into the very trap he had set for so many others? "Activate the weapon. Now," one of the officers demanded, seeing the hesitation in Zoratha's eyes. Lena stepped in front of him, her small frame blocking his view of the device. "Emperor, listen to me. Use your mind, not just your strength. There is always another way. Let me help you." Zorath felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, frustration, and, for the first time, doubt. He had always known what he wanted, but now, with Lena's words ringing in his ears, he wondered if he had ever truly understood the price of what he sought. He looked at the data terminal, where the device's activation sequence was blinking. The rebels were closing in. His fleet would soon be engaged, and without the weapon, they might fall short. But, could he truly sacrifice everything for a moment's victory? With a deep, unsteady breath, Zorath made his decision. "No," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "Not yet. We will face them the way we always have, through strength, through strategy, and through the will of those who serve me. We will not rely on this weapon." Lena's eyes softened, a faint but genuine smile touching her lips. "Then let's do it together," she said. For the first time in Zoratha's life, he felt something stirring within him, a sense of hope, of possibility, that perhaps the galaxy could be something more than just an endless cycle of conflict. As the sovereign prepared for battle, the Emperor knew that whatever happened next, he would face it not just as a conqueror, but as a leader, and perhaps, for the first time, as a protector. And with Lena by his side, he knew he wasn't alone in the battle for the future of the galaxy. Galactic Emperor witnesses 11-year-old human slave save his ship, rewards her with. Sci-Fi HFY, continued. The rebel fleet arrived with the cold, efficient precision that had become their trademark. But Zorath was prepared. As the Sovereign's battle stations powered up, the Emperor's mind was sharp, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he was focused, not on the overwhelming force at his command, but on the strategy, the deeper threads of the galaxy that bound the conflict together. Zorath glanced at Lena, who stood beside him at the war table. She was calm, unwavering, her eyes scanning the digital maps of the battlefield, already formulating plans of her own. She had taught him to see the situation from a new angle, not just as a clash of armies, but as a puzzle, each piece with a hidden solution. "Rebel forces are approaching from the upper quadrant," one of his officers reported. "They've gained significant speed, likely planning a direct assault on the Sovereign." "Do not underestimate them," Zorath muttered. His eyes met Lena's. "What do you suggest?" Lena stepped forward, her fingers flying across the command console, her mind effortlessly weaving through the data. "The rebels are coming in fast. They'll try to hit you where you're weakest. We need to anticipate their first strike, bait them into a false confidence, use that to catch them in the second wave." Zorath studied her expression, understanding that she was already 2 steps ahead of him. "A trap?" "Exactly," Lena said, her voice steady. "We'll show weakness where they expect it, then hit them with everything we've got in the areas they don't expect. They'll think they've won before they realize they've walked into a bigger fight." The officers around them exchanged glances, but Zorath raised his hand. "Trust her. Prepare the fleet." The Sovereign's fleet began to move into position, deliberately weakening their front lines, allowing the rebel ships to advance, lured by the bait. As they closed in, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Zoratha's hand hovered near the command console, his eyes locked on the approaching enemy ships. the first wave of rebel forces struck. The Sovereign's shields buckled under the pressure. But Zorith remained calm. Lena had calculated this perfectly. The rebels were overconfident, eager to strike their perceived victory. Now, Zorith said, and in that instant, the trap sprang to life. The Sovereign's hidden reserve of weaponry flared to life. Long-range energy cannons fired, hitting the rebel fleet with stunning precision. The second wave of Zorith's fleet emerged from stealth, surrounding the rebels on all sides. What had seemed like a strategic advantage for the enemy turned into a nightmare. The rebels, taken by surprise, scrambled to respond, but their efforts were futile. The Sovereign's firepower overwhelmed them, and their lines began to fracture. Zorith's fleet surged forward, cutting through the remaining ships with ruthless efficiency. On the bridge, Zorith watched as the battle unfolded, but his eyes were drawn to Lena. She had been right. The rebels had underestimated them, and now their arrogance had led to their downfall. As the final rebel ship was destroyed, Zorith turned to his officers. "Report," he commanded. "Enemy fleet has been neutralized," one of the commanders said. "Minimal damage to our fleet. It's over." Zorith stood still for a moment, processing the victory. The Sovereign had emerged unscathed, and the galaxy's balance of power had shifted once again in his favor. But it was not the victory that filled him with pride. It was the method, the strategic brilliance, the calculated restraint that had turned the tide, and the key to it all had been Lena's wisdom. "Well done, Emperor," Lena said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "You led them into a battle they never saw coming." Zorith nodded, his eyes still fixed on the view of the now empty battlefield. "It wasn't just me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was us." Lena tilted her head, a small smile on her lips. "And now?" Zorith looked at the destroyed rebel ships, his thoughts racing. "Now we rebuild, but more importantly, we protect. There's been too much destruction, too many people who have suffered. We can't simply rule by power. We must lead by purpose." Lena's smile widened, and for the first time, Zorith saw the full depth of her belief in him. She had always believed that power could be used for more than domination. She had always known that leadership required more than strength. It required vision. "You're not the same person I met all those months ago," Lena said, her voice tinged with pride. "You've changed, Emperor, and that's something worth protecting." Zorith met her gaze, a sense of clarity washing over him. He had started this journey seeking absolute control, but now he realized that true strength wasn't about domination. It was about knowing when to act, when to fight, and when to protect what mattered most. "I have you to thank for that," Zorith said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "Your wisdom has saved us all." "Lena." She shook her head. "No, Emperor, I simply helped you see what was already inside you." Zorith was quiet for a moment, lost in thought. For the first time, he understood the true nature of leadership. Power was not about domination. It was about vision, restraint, and the responsibility to protect. And he realized that the galaxy, with all its vastness and complexity, needed something more than an emperor who sought to conquer. It needed a protector who would build a future, not through the force of weapons, but through the strength of understanding. "We will protect this galaxy, Lena," he said, his voice resolute. "Not through fear, but through unity. Together, we'll build something that will last." Lena nodded, her expression firm, her resolve unwavering. Together. As the Sovereign sailed through the stars, Zorith knew that his journey was far from over. The galaxy would continue to challenge him, the struggles would persist, and new threats would rise. But now, for the first time, he felt ready not just to fight, but to guide. And with Lena by his side, they would face whatever came next, not as ruler and advisor, but as allies, as the architects of a new age, the age of a galaxy united by wisdom, not force, by vision, not conquest. The future was uncertain, but Zorith had learned that it was not the power to destroy that would define him, it was the power to protect, to lead, and to create a lasting peace. And that was a future worth fighting for. Galactic Emperor witnesses 11-year-old human slave save his ship, rewards her with. Sci-Fi HFY, continued. The days following the rebel defeat were marked by a subtle but undeniable shift in Zorith's leadership. The Sovereign's command was smoother, more coordinated. The fleet seemed to respond not just to his orders, but to the purpose behind them. It was a purpose that had grown clear in the wake of the battle. Power, when wielded without wisdom, would lead to endless cycles of violence. But power, when tempered with understanding, could guide an entire galaxy toward a new future. Zoratha's transformation, however, wasn't without its challenges. Many of his advisors and generals were still steeped in the old ways, brutal, uncompromising. They saw the way Zorath now consulted Lena, the child who had once been a mere slave, and they whispered in corners, questioning his decisions. The sovereign's power had been hard-earned, and many feared that the emperor's newfound philosophy was a weakness, an opening for their enemies to exploit. But Zorath, now more attuned to the rhythm of his own heart and the pulse of the galaxy, remained resolute. He knew that change was never easy, but he also knew that true leadership was never about appeasing the masses. It was about doing what was right. Lena, for her part, had grown more confident as well. She was no longer just an advisor. She had become the Emperor's most trusted partner, a symbol of the human potential Zorath had once dismissed. She spent her days alongside him in the command chambers, offering strategies and insights that even the most seasoned generals had missed. Her intellect was unrivaled, and her ability to think beyond the obvious made her indispensable. Her influence on Zoratha's decisions was subtle, but it was clear in every one of his moves. One day, as the Sovereign drifted through a peaceful sector of space, Lena approached Zorath with a new proposition. The peace they had won through victory was fragile, and the galaxy remained on the edge of a new war, one that could spiral out of control if not handled carefully. She had a plan to ensure that the peace would be sustained. "We can't just conquer every threat that rises," she said, standing before him in the war room. "The galaxy is full of diverse peoples, cultures, and planets. If we are to ensure peace, we need to give them a voice. They need to know that they are not just pawns in your game of power." Zorath looked at her, his mind weighing her words. The thought had crossed his mind before, but hearing it from Lena gave it new weight. "You mean a council, a representative body, to speak for the different worlds?" "Yes," Lena said, her eyes shining with purpose. "A council where every system, every race, every planet, has a say in the future of the galaxy. You don't have to rule through fear anymore. You can unite these people, make them believe that the Empire is their protector, not their oppressor. Let them help guide the future." Zorath turned away from her for a moment, lost in thought. He had never considered such a move, an alliance built on mutual respect, not dominance. Could such a thing work? Would the various systems truly come together, or would they try to undermine one another, tearing apart any chance of true unity? Lena's voice broke through his reverie. "I know you fear that. But the galaxy is filled with more than just rebels and conquerors. There are those who simply want peace, who want to rebuild what has been destroyed. We can give them that chance." Zorath turned back to her, his eyes softening. "And you think they will listen? They will trust me?" "They will trust you if you show them a different way," Lena said. "A way that doesn't involve more bloodshed. You have the power to lead them, not through fear, but through respect, and that respect begins with listening." Zorath stood still for a long moment, considering. He had always believed that power could only be maintained through force, through fear. But now, with Lena's guidance, he was starting to see a different path, one that didn't involve the crushing weight of domination, but instead, the delicate balance of leadership and cooperation. "How do we begin?" he asked, finally. Lena smiled, the confidence in her eyes unwavering. "We start by reaching out to the systems that are still fractured, the ones that are too afraid to speak. We offer them a place at the table. We show them that this empire can be a force for something more than just conquest. We show them that it can be a force for life." Zorath nodded slowly. "Very well. I will call for the first meeting. We will begin to build this council." As the days passed, the Emperor and Lena sent out emissaries to the various systems across the galaxy, inviting them to send representatives to what would be known as the Council of the Galaxy. The response was tentative at first. Many systems were still wary, their leaders unsure of Zoratha's intentions. Some even feared that this was a trap, a ploy to consolidate his power further. But as the invitations spread, more and more systems began to consider the possibility of peace, of working together instead of fighting one another. On the day of the first council meeting, Zorath stood at the center of a massive chamber aboard the Sovereign. Representatives from dozens of different species and planets had arrived, each one uncertain but hopeful. They were reluctant, But they were willing to listen. This was not the empire they had once feared, it was something new, something different, and that was something they could work with. Lena stood by his side, her eyes bright with anticipation. This was her vision, her hope for the future of the galaxy. She had helped the Emperor see a different way, and now, together, they would shape that future. Zorith addressed the council. For centuries, the galaxy has been torn apart by conflict and fear. I have ruled with power, and I have watched as that power has caused suffering. But I believe that there is another way, a way built on unity, respect, and collaboration. You have come here today because you, too, believe in that possibility, and together, we will build a future that we can all share. There was a long silence in the room. The representatives exchanged cautious glances, but no one spoke out in opposition. Zorith could feel the weight of their hopes, their fears. This was a turning point for him, for Lena, and for the galaxy. Lena spoke next, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. We do not ask you to surrender your autonomy or your way of life. We ask for your voice, for your partnership, in building a future where all systems, all peoples, can live in peace. A future where we are not conquerors, but protectors of the galaxy. For a long moment, the room was still, until one by one, the representatives nodded. The galaxy was ready for a new era, and though it would not be easy, they were willing to try. The council session ended with tentative agreements and promises, the beginning of something much larger than Zorith could have imagined. He looked over at Lena, and for the first time, he saw her not just as an advisor, but as a true partner, a fellow architect of the galaxy's future. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance, challenges, and new dangers lurking on the horizon. But Zorith knew now that it was not through force that he would shape the galaxy, it was through wisdom, through unity, and through the guidance of those who believed in something better. And for the first time, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was just the beginning.